Hey, millionaire. Eike Batista has gained a lot of attention in recent years. He once bragged that he'd soon be the richest man in the world. In that way, he stands out amongst the super rich, who usually at least pretend to be humble. In his defense, he looked like he was on track to achieving that bold claim, but it wouldn't last. How did Batista go from one of the 10 richest people on Earth to sharing a prison cell with $0 in his bank account? We're going to take a closer look at the rise and dramatic fall of Batista's empire, right up to where he is now. Get ready, this story is wilder than a roller coaster. Eike Batista was born in southeastern Brazil in 1956 as one of 7 siblings. His mom was German, and his dad was a prominent Brazilian businessman who served as the Minister of Mines and Energy in the 60s. You can bet he served as an inspiration to the young Eike as he was growing up. Batista grew up in Brazil and finally went to his mother's native Germany to study metallurgy at a technical university, but Batista dropped out before he finished the course. Instead of studying, he returned to Brazil and opened a mining and gold trading company at the age of 23. Amazingly, it wasn't long before that started looking like a pretty good idea. He made millions off this business before the end of the 1980s, and he was now already more successful than anyone could have predicted from the young uni dropout. He used his new and growing fortune to start investing. He started collecting corporations under his umbrella, EBX Group. He made sure all his companies had an X in their title to symbolize the multiplication of his money. Soon, he had investments in real estate, shipbuilding, logistics, energy, and fossil fuel. It was the gold and fossil fuels that were his most valuable assets, though. Between 1980 and 2000, Batista had a whopping 8 gold mines in Brazil, but it was in 2007 that he struck gold in a different way when he founded OGX, his oil and gas company. He spared no expense with this new venture, spending an incredible $1 billion on licenses that would allow the company to explore areas of the Brazilian coast in hopes of finding oil. It paid off. Just 1 year later, he made Forbes' list of billionaires, and by 2010, he was named one of the 10 wealthiest people in the world. He was living the good life now. By 2012, he was worth $34.5 billion. He had eloped with a model and already divorced her. He was spending his spare time racing crazy expensive speedboats at international championships. He was even using his personal wealth to help Brazil win the bid to host the Olympics in Rio, and was telling the media that his oil fields were worth $1 trillion. Basically, he was living a life that we'd imagine if we pictured a stereotypical billionaire. Did you know that with $34.5 billion, Batista could spend $11.50 every second of his life and still never run out of money? With that kind of cash, he can spend $1 million a day for about 95 years. Can you hit subscribe faster than Batista can hit $57? You have 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Keep watching to find out if Batista can still spend that much cash today. But underneath all the glitz and glam, there were whispers of scandals. His mining company had already been fined several times for failure to follow environmental regulations, and it didn't look like anything was being done to correct the problem. At the same time, the Tupi-Guarani tribe had publicly accused Batista's logistics company of using bribery and coercion to force them off their native land of the Atlantic coast of Brazil. In 2008, things got serious when allegations of fraud, tax evasion, and gold smuggling ended in police raiding Batista's home and offices. He was cleared of these allegations, but it was clear that Batista's life wasn't as perfect as it seemed. But even though the growing number of legal problems couldn't bring Batista down, falling oil prices could. A dip in the Brazilian economy added to Batista's worries. His wealth was already collapsing when he got the worst news of all. Remember his seriously bold claims about his new oil fields? His estimates about how much oil he could produce were way off. In reality, they could only produce 1% of what Batista had expected. Yeah, that doesn't sound great. It meant he was in serious trouble. With no oil to sell, he couldn't pay back the $1 billion debt he got himself into when he bought all those licenses to look for the oil in the first place. In 2013, these financial problems started to boil over when he defaulted on a shockingly large interest payment of $45 million. This was the first sign that his empire was about to collapse. It didn't take long to get there. Batista quickly started selling off his assets, but he couldn't save his oil and gas company, OGX, which had to file for bankruptcy. That failure became the biggest bankruptcy application in the history of Latin America. But that was still only one disaster that Batista was facing. The prices of 5 out of 6 of his publicly traded holdings collapsed completely, along with his title as one of the world's richest people. And if that wasn't enough to worry about, he also found himself in court for insider trading. However, the trial was suspended when the judge was caught going for a ride in one of Batista's private luxury cars. That was only a small help because even though he had time to regroup before going back on trial, his bank balance wasn't quite so lucky. By now, it was 2015, and he was a mind-blowing $1 billion in debt. Let that sink in for a moment. What are your thoughts about the fall of Batista's empire? Let us know in the comments, and keep watching to find out where he is now. In 2017, things only got worse for Batista. As incredible as that seems, he was arrested for involvement in a high-profile political scandal in Brazil, known as the Petrobras scandal. It was a pretty serious case. He's been accused of paying $16.5 million in bribes. The court agreed with the allegations, and he was given a prison sentence. But it was even worse than you imagine. Remember when I mentioned he never finished his university studies? If he'd got his degree, he would have been entitled to stay in a special, pretty comfortable prison for important people under Brazilian law. But, as I said, he's chosen to be a lazy student and dropped out before getting his degree. So, he had to serve his sentence in a filthy prison cell, which he shared with 6 other inmates. You can bet that's not exactly the life he was used to. But luckily for Batista, they cut him a break, and in April 2017, he was allowed to serve out his sentence under house arrest. That was great, but in just a few months, he was back in court. He was fined $6.3 million for insider trading. That's gotta hurt when you're already $1 billion in debt. In 2018, he was back on trial again. You're probably thinking by now that things couldn't get any worse, but they did. Batista was found guilty of bribery and received a huge sentence of 30 years in prison. He was still, thankfully, allowed to remain under house arrest. But in 2019, he nearly messed that up too. He found himself in legal trouble again, this time on allegations of money laundering and insider trading. Police raided his house in Rio, where he was meant to be under house arrest, but they couldn't find him. It didn't take them long to discover that he'd flown to New York just hours before the raid. That's as serious as it sounds. He was immediately declared a fugitive, and an international manhunt began. But you'd never guess who turned him in. It was Batista himself. He said he was doing his duty as a Brazilian, and he returned to Brazil, where he handed himself over to the police. He was imprisoned again, but only for a short time. He is currently under house arrest, waiting to hear the news of his appeal. But the story isn't over. It's now 2022, and unbelievably, it looks like Batista might be bouncing back. He's far from being $1 billion in debt now. In fact, it looks like his current net worth is somewhere between $95 million and $273 million. But I'll bet you're wondering how that's possible when things were looking so bad for Batista. There are a few ways he's still earning money. Of course, he has an impressive amount of real estate, plus an advertising contract with a cosmetic company, clever stock market investments, and other royalties and investments that are helping keep him afloat. Sure, that's a long way from being the richest man in the world, but it's not bad considering all the problems he's faced lately. He's now claiming that he wants to help Brazilian authorities fight corruption. You'll have to decide for yourself if you believe him. It's hard to tell what's about to come next, but I get the feeling we haven't heard the last of Eike Batista. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any news about the fallen multi-billionaire.